Coming up, Jack Smith is dropping both the federal cases against Trump. I'm going to show you why the hunter may now become the hunted. I'll review the abominable work of the January 6th committee, and I want to show you how it is now becoming finally discredited. And attorney Ron Coleman, who's a counsel at the Dhillon Law Group, joins me. We're going to talk about the various Trump lawfare cases. Hey, if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble or listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
We might have expected this to happen, and yet it signals the end of a certain era. Jack Smith has made a motion to dismiss the January 6th case, the election interference case, the Washington, D.C. case before Judge Tanya Chutkan, and she has granted the dismissal, quote, without prejudice. Now, a little bit later in the podcast, I'm going to have a prominent attorney, Ron Coleman, on, and I'm going to ask him to explain the without prejudice. What are the sort of legal implications of this? But I want to talk about the broader significance of all this, because where we are now is that both the big federal cases, in fact, the cases that were really supposed to get Trump, I think for the left, the other cases were bonus. We might get him in Georgia. Let's see what Fani Willis can do. We might get him in New York. Let's see what Alvin Bragg can do. But they were riding their hopes on this seasoned prosecutor, Jack Smith, and the media was just agog and amazed and gushing over this guy. I don't know if you remember, there was a kind of a classic scene where CNN was commenting about Jack Smith, and all Jack Smith did was he went into a Subway and he bought a $5 sub, and he was kind of eating it as he left the Subway. And then now I remember Jake Tapper and all these guys, John King, they're talking about, I'm not quoting from CNN, Jack Smith going to Subway is a message to Donald Trump. Jack Smith with no words and a simple $5 sub in his hand saying, I'm not going anywhere. So this guy was portrayed as the superhero of the left. And of course, Trump was supposed to be the supervillain. Well, evidently the supervillain has come out ahead. In fact, Debbie was saying, Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. Jack somehow failed to jump over the candlestick. So it's over in that sense. It's certainly practically over for the next 4 years. And another way to understand this is that in the election, the American people have delivered the biggest jury verdict of any case in all of human history, which is basically not guilty. Not only not guilty, but we are empowering the defendant to now rule over us, be the head of our country. I mean, this goes beyond an acquittal. An acquittal is basically the jury going, okay, well, we're going to let you back out on the street. Good luck with you in your life. It's a whole different matter to say, we're going to let you out on the street, and you can now become our boss and tell us what to do. So this is an amazing turnaround. Now, we've got to remember that Jack Smith, his case was always about the election. And we see this in the various motions that he was filing. He wasn't having much luck in Florida because he had a Trump judge, Eileen Cannon, and she was shutting him down, swatting him down, playing with him, as I once said, cat and mouse. But in Washington, D.C., Jack Smith had a whole different setup. Not only the likelihood of a overwhelming Democratic jury, but also a cooperative left-wing judge who hates Trump, eager to get him. And so Jack Smith was like, this is very fertile ground for me. And so he was making motions. Hey, listen, let's let's accelerate the pace of the trial. Let's try to get this done before the election. And Judge Chutkan was very willing to do it. We've got to remind ourselves that it was only the Supreme Court ruling on immunity that threw a major wrench into the plan, because now you have to separate all Trump's official acts from his unofficial acts and take out all the official acts because those are immune. So there was, in fact, once the Supreme Court made that ruling, there was no way the trial could go on before the election. But they wanted it to. And also, it's worth remembering that if Trump had lost the election, they would have pushed full speed ahead. So this was primarily about election interference, but at the same time, there was enough vendetta, enough venom, enough let's get Trump, that I do not think. Some people say, well, you know, if once the election's over, Trump becomes irrelevant. If he loses the election, he's going to go his own way. Nobody's going to be out to get him. I don't think this is true. It might have been true at the beginning. If Trump decided, let's say, not to run, the left would have been like, all right, well, we're not, you know, these cases are not that important. Kind of the way that for us, the Biden impeachment became less important when Biden decided, Biden did not decide. Biden was twisted. He was arm twisted into not running. The Republicans basically sort of lost their enthusiasm for pushing forward on those things. Now, the left is really mad about all this. And I see a lot of the leftists and never Trumpers saying something to the effect, well, here's one guy, Adam Parkomenko. Pretty crazy. Someone can be charged federally with interfering in an election, and those charges get dropped because they win an election. What he's really saying is we had hoped to stop the guy before he could run at all, and certainly prevent him from winning. And now, you know, why should his merely winning an election somehow make the case go away? Well, yes, if Trump had robbed a grocery store, I can see this point having some validity. But when you are making a case against him, essentially to torpedo his chances for running, when the case itself has no merit whatsoever, and then the American people look at the facts, and the left has had every chance through the media to educate the American people about what a horrible criminal Trump is, and yet the American people go, nah, we don't think this is a big deal. By the way, even people who didn't vote for Trump don't think it's a big deal. There's been a lot of examinations where they ask people, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And they have lots of reasons to vote against Trump, but this is not really one of them. Now, here's Brian Stelter, quote, Special counsel Jack Smith set out to prove that even presidents are not above the law. Instead, his failed prosecutions ended up making Trump more powerful. Now, this, I think, is actually true. It's true because why? Well, let's think about it this way. In South Africa, when the apartheid regime rounded up Nelson Mandela and stuck him in prison, and by the way, Mandela was, I think, 14 years in prison on Robben Island. When Mandela got out, he was more powerful than ever. Why? Because by and large, the people rendered the verdict and said, look, the reason you got him is not because of anything really bad that he did, but because he opposed your apartheid system. So when you make this kind of a political strike against somebody and it fails, what it is the people are affirming that they don't agree with you. Trump is not the criminal. In fact, you were trying to get him on a criminal scheme that you concocted. So ultimately, Trump becomes stronger than ever. Now, I do not think it is very much a Republican mindset to move on. Okay, well, that's over. Phew, thank God. Let's just forge ahead. People voted for lower gas prices, and there's a little bit of a temptation to let all this subside. I don't think that is the right approach. I think that these people need to be held accountable, and there are appropriate laws under which they can be. And so what we need here is, on the part of the Trump team, a very careful review of ways in which we can explore the question of which of these people can be faulted here and held accountable for breaking the law, for breaking the very law that they claim to be upholding. Because, all right, no one's above the law. We aren't. You aren't either. And so now it's time to see what we have on you. We've seen what you have on us, and you have gone after not just Trump, you've gone after lots of other people. You put Bannon in jail, you put Peter Navarro in jail, you've put a bunch of January 6th defendants in jail and protesters in jail, you've put some pro-life activists in jail. Well, actually now it's our turn. And we're going to go about it with the same kind of careful review of the federal statutes to see where you have crossed the line. And where you have crossed the line, you can now expect FBI agents to show up at your door. This year, I've given you a bunch of reasons to try Balance of Nature, and I've got a new one I want to add to it that you shouldn't ignore. But let's review some of the other reasons. First, with Balance of Nature, we're talking about this: fruits and veggies in a capsule. In other words, a product made from whole fruit and veggie ingredients. Second, Balance of Nature provides you with so many of the things you may be missing. Third, it could be just what you've been looking for to make you feel better. And of course, Debbie and I take them. We love them. But I think you'll agree that the reason I'm going to give you is better than the others. Why? Because during November, with my special promo code, you get their Black Friday savings all month long. Use my discount code, which is just the word America. Sign up as a new customer. You get 50% off plus free shipping. This is really an unbelievable discount, but you got to use my discount code America. Here's the number to call: 800-246-8751. Again, it's 800-246-8751, or go to balanceofnature.com. When you use discount code America, you get 50% off plus free shipping. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing Share Right. It's healthcare done the right way. At Share Right, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. And forget about paying excessive premiums. With Share Right, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. Think about what you could do with all those savings. But it's more than just savings. Share Right ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With Share Right, your healthcare is their top priority. Empower yourself today. Take control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. Learn more. See how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. There was a recent survey of the American people about their views about January 6th. And very interestingly, it showed that the American people are divided right down the middle. About half of the public said, quote, "Too much is being made of this. It's time to move on." And the other half, roughly, said it was an attack on democracy. So the view of January 6th appears to mirror the left-right divide in American society. And there's an article by Jonathan Turley, the political scientist Jonathan Turley, who says, why is this? Why is it that the same event, January 6th, which, by the way, was not some secret event, we could watch it as it happened. You could see both sides of it, if you will. You could see there were some scenes of people, cops fighting with protesters. You could see that there were scenes of protesters breaking glass. You could see that there was a shooting and killing of Ashley Babbitt. You could see that there was a lot of pushing and shoving, and there was a lot of smoke and a lot of gas. But there were also scenes of Capitol Police high-fiving January 6th protesters, leading them through the galleries, even ushering them to a degree. And then there were the things that we saw that didn't happen. No one said, everyone has to leave right now. No, there were no bullhorns announcing that the place has to be cleared out. So we all saw the same thing. And why is there such a divided opinion about it? And Jonathan Turley says a lot of the blame for that goes to the January 6th committee. Now, I think there's a lot of other blame that goes to the media and other institutions that have twisted and distorted the truths about January 6th. But I think Turley's point holds. What the media was doing was amplifying the lies of the January 6th committee. And then Turley does a kind of very nice, quick overview of the January 6th committee. And he says, look, this was from the beginning a staged operation. Republicans wanted to put some conservative Republicans on the committee, and basically the committee said no. The committee was only willing to have never Trump Republicans. In other words, Republicans who would take a singular point of view and agree with the Democrats that Trump is awful. It was a prefabricated narrative. It was essentially the narrative of Pelosi and Schumer and Liz Cheney. And these people manipulated the facts, excluded facts that would cut against their narrative. A really good example is that they knew that at no point, this is just an instance of the kind of prevarication, falsehoods. They allowed the falsehood to get out that Trump somehow tried to wrestle control of the presidential limousine and go to the Capitol, even though they knew full well. I mean, subsequently, of course, this whole thing has been discredited. The guy driving the car said, that didn't happen. Trump never tried to wrestle control from me. But the January 6th committee knew that. They had already interviewed the guy. But they allowed the false narrative to go out. Why? Because they were putting out a manufactured propagandistic narrative. They allowed the whole rhetoric of insurrection to get out there, even though they knew this was no insurrection. In fact, there was a Harvard study that looked closely at the motivations of people in January 6th, and the conclusion of the study was, look, these are people, by and large, who were loyal to Trump. They were dismayed by what they saw as a stolen election. That's why they did it. It had nothing to do with fomenting an insurrection. They were not trying to take over the Capitol. They were not trying to overthrow the government. This is all nonsense. And yet, this is the nonsense that was peddled in the media. And peddled, I would argue, with nefarious intent, because the word insurrection is in the 14th Amendment. That wasn't a word that just came out of nowhere. They used that word knowingly from the beginning. Why? Because they recognize this is a guy that may want to run for election again. We can try to get him off the ticket by invoking the 14th Amendment. If this was an insurrection, he was the leading insurrectionist. And even though we don't have any clear evidence of him saying go inside the Capitol, nevertheless, in D.C., that's not really going to matter. All we have to do is to get a jury to go, yeah, he did instigate it. After all, these were his people. They showed up in D.C. They went to the Capitol after they heard him talk. And so somehow he signaled to them to do that, because why else would they go to the Capitol? So this is really what the left was going for. They wanted the insurrection label or millstone to be hung around Trump so that he could be kicked off the ticket in key states, which would obviously make it impossible for him to win the election. It's also now become clear, and Turley points out, that Trump did in fact request 10,000 National Guard. The failure of security, and quite honestly, I don't believe this was a failure of security. I think by and large the Democrats realized, listen, it'll be a really good thing for us if we let some of these people into the Capitol. It is in the nature of crowds to push into a building if nobody stops them. It's kind of like in a museum. If there's an exhibit and you have no one is standing there saying, "Don't go. This hallway is closed." People are going to go down the hallway and check out the exhibit. And this, so there's a kind of natural tendency to want to go inside and make a protest and talk to your representatives. And so I think the Democrats realized, let's just leave the doors kind of half ajar. Let's remove the barricades. Let these people get in, because then they are walking into a trap. Now, of course, it is our stupidity to walk into that trap. I've never said the contrary. But the point here is that Trump was willing to secure the premises, and the Democrats basically made sure that didn't happen. So put all this together, and then, of course, there's also the issue of Ashley Babbitt, which I plan to address in the next few days. I mean, obviously, we're going into Thanksgiving week. This might end up being something I talk about early next week, because the more we learn about the whole Ashley Babbitt situation, the more you realize how terrible that was, and the cover-up involving Captain Michael Byrd, who fired that fatal shot at Ashley Babbitt, really without any warrant at all. And so Turley's conclusion is really the same as mine, which is that the January 6th committee was a deceptive propagandistic operation from the outset. But it was an operation that was completely necessary to cover up what actually happened on January 6th. See, once you have stuff that happened on January 6th, you've now got to make sure that none of that really gets out, because otherwise the lesson of January 6th is going to be very different from the one that the Democrats want to put out. They want to put out that the lesson of January 6th is a bunch of Trumpsters tried to overthrow our government, led by Trump himself. That was from the beginning a false narrative. The January 6th committee knew that, but they were set up to try to promote that false narrative and prevent the truth from getting out. The story of My Pillow is a testament of faith and transformation. Mike Lindell, once battling addiction, found a new path when he embraced faith and began following Jesus. And gratitude, Mike is excited to share an exclusive offer with my listeners and viewers. Right now, the standard My Pillow is available for just $14.88, a savings that's too good to pass up. There's a limit of 10 per customer. Don't wait to take advantage of this amazing deal now with promo code Dinesh. Mike believes God gave him the idea for My Pillow in a dream, and it's designed with your comfort in mind. The pillow holds its shape. It adapts perfectly to your unique sleep position, helping keep your neck aligned for the best night's sleep. And there are good deals all around. Take home a 4-piece kitchen set, $25. Enjoy the new mattress topper starting at just $99.99. Pick up the luxurious My Pillow bed sheets starting at $49.98. Here's the number to call, 800-876-0227. Again, that's 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. Use promo code Dinesh and unlock huge discounts. Don't miss out. Order today. Guys, I'm delighted to welcome a new guest, Ron Coleman. He is a prominent attorney, counsel in the Dhillon Law Group, where he was previously a partner. This is a firm with offices all around the country: California, New York, Florida, Texas, and Virginia. You can follow Ron on X at Ron Coleman, or the website Coleman, Coleman-nation.com. He's host of the Coleman Nation. Ron, welcome. Thank you for joining me. I thought we'd had you on the podcast before. I follow you on social media, so I'm very familiar with the stuff you're doing. Anyway, delighted to belatedly have you on board here. And I wanted to ask you about the Trump cases. And in particular, let me start by asking you about the decision by Jack Smith to now drop the D.C. case, the so-called election interference, provoking an insurrection case. We had already heard previously that Jack Smith was dismantling the Florida classified documents case. So I guess this means that the two federal cases are now, I don't know if on the shelf or in the wastepaper basket. What's a better way to characterize it? But let me put the ball in your court and ask you where things stand with the two cases and what's the significance of it.
Dinesh, I'll just quickly make it clear that although our firm does represent the president with respect to various matters, these are not among them, and I'm not involved. I'm speaking for myself entirely. If even that, it is probably more accurate to say that at least the Washington case is on the shelf, and that's a little bit problematic. And I'm referring, of course, to the without prejudice dismissal. A lawsuit can be dismissed with prejudice or without prejudice. Without prejudice means it can be refiled under appropriate circumstances. I think that's constitutionally problematic. The entire reason Jack Smith dismissed this, at least the official reason, we can speculate as to whether the real reason was it didn't achieve the goal of preventing him from succeeding either as a technical matter to run for president or as a political matter. But the nominal reason for the dismissal was, hey, it appears that the Justice Department's policy is that a sitting president may not be prosecuted or indicted. So he's going to be president. There's nothing I can do about that. Try as I might have. So let's just dismiss this without prejudice. Without prejudice meaning that, at least in theory, it can be refiled after Mr. Trump's term in office. I don't think that's good enough. Not only it's not good enough because you and I support Donald Trump, it's not good enough from a constitutional point of view. The idea of immunity, which is laid out in Judge Chutkan's opinion, is, of course, that the president should not be threatened by certainly a department that he's the head of, but also that he should not be threatened by the government when he is president. Having an open indictment against you in a matter regarding which you might yet be prosecuted when you leave office is a very substantial threat. Now, I will agree, we don't want to live in a world in which merely by becoming president, a person can magically make all potential crimes that he's committed go away. I get that. But under these circumstances, and I would hope that the Trump team will push back on this. I have no inside information again, but it seems like from a lawyerly point of view, the move to make here is to oppose the motion to dismiss on these grounds. And again, they can't lose doing this because Chutkan has already agreed that that it has to be dismissed. But procedurally, how they would go from here, whether it would be a motion for reconsideration or an appeal, I'm not entirely clear. It does seem that there was a consent given to the filing. So again, I don't know procedurally what they have in store, but that's the move here. I do think it's a problem. They may have made a decision not to deal with it right now. That would be my take on Washington. In terms of Florida, that was going nowhere fast anyway. And Jack Smith managed to get himself out of what was going to be a very embarrassing loss on the merits and on the facts.
Ron, it seems pretty clear that this, certainly the Jack Smith case in D.C. and probably the Florida one as well, was aimed at making a difference in the election. And I say that because Jack Smith wanted an accelerated schedule. It seems like Judge Tanya Chutkan was up for it. They both were sort of in agreement. I think at one point, Judge Tanya Chutkan said something like, not to release this information right before the election would be election interference. In other words, the American public deserves to know what a rotten scoundrel this Donald Trump is, and maybe they will reconsider voting for him in November. So all of this appears to have been built around the election. And maybe I'll suggest further that had Trump lost the election, I mean, isn't it obvious that none of this would be happening? They would, in fact, probably double down and go, hey, now here's our chance to get this guy, and let's try to make this lawfare work finally after all. Is there any doubt that they would be pushing forward if Trump had lost?
Well, there's nothing to even speculate with respect to Washington because they walked into that court and said, he's going to be president. He's going to be immune. We cannot prosecute him. There have been some commenters I've seen who said they probably would have let this slide off because the only goal was to prevent him from succeeding in re-election. I find that a little bit far-fetched. There has always been a decided viciousness about the entire way this has been handled. It's been extremely personal. The way they've gone after people, including you, who have had anything to do with promoting or supporting Donald Trump in a visible way. No, this was going. Remember the prediction from some very despicable people 5 years ago. Donald Trump will end his life alone in a dark cell somewhere. Okay, there is such genuine hatred for him and for everyone he represents.
Ron, just so we're kind of up on the overall landscape here, let's visit the other cases so we know exactly where they are. As far as I know, with regard to the Georgia case, the judge sort of put it on indefinite hold, which is not to say that the case has gone away. This is, by the way, not a federal case, so presumably there might be some chances for it to push forward. Update us on the Georgia and the New York cases, because those are state cases. What's going to happen in those areas?
Well, they're state cases, but the Supreme Court's rule with respect to immunity is an absolute rule. It would apply in both state and federal court. So they both have problems. Besides the fact that they were both patently preposterous claims, flawed on multiple legal grounds, even according to the laws of the states of Georgia and New York. Putting that aside, and that's like saying, well, Mrs. Lincoln, otherwise, how did you enjoy the play? Putting those aside, both of them relied on evidence that should not have been made part of the record. In fact, the Georgia claim essentially adopted the entire unlawful, unconstitutional, and crooked January 6th committee report as evidence. Now, that's not even evidence under the laws of evidence. You couldn't convict a pickpocket based on that kind of third party out of court statements. That's all hearsay. It's absolute garbage. But there's no question that there were many immune actions that Donald Trump took that were the subject of the January 6th report. So Georgia is garbage, and that's got to be flushed out. And with the change of the administration and the Justice Department, I think there will be a conversation at some point about taking that. And again, the Justice Department, although it is the chief executive's law department, it's not the president's private lawyer, and everything needs to be done on the up and up, and transparently as possible. I don't have any problem with retribution, political retribution, and where appropriate, legal retribution, because justice needs to be served. There are ways to do this. If the Georgia authorities are wise, they will get this problem resolved on its own. That doesn't mean, however, that there might not be civil rights claims or other investigations of which the Georgia case might find itself to be subject of. It's really problematic what they did there, especially the multitude of meetings between the prosecutors in Georgia and in New York with the White House. Really, really unusual and problematic. It needs to be addressed, and hopefully also Congress will address it through its oversight plans. And in terms of New York, a very similar situation. A very, very flawed case. And everyone seems to agree that the judge is this close to getting rid of it himself. I'm sure that the Trump team is interested in ultimately vindicating the president. So merely getting these cases dismissed, to me, if I were making the decisions, would not be enough. There ought to be review, and there ought to be vindication on many, many levels.
It seems like in the New York case, as far as I know, the judge is adopting a very similar approach to Judge Chutkan in D.C., namely, he's sort of holding off. I don't think he wants to say you're off the hook. I don't think he wants to say the case is gone. So what he seems to be saying is, I'll defer the sentencing. I'll indefinitely defer the sentencing. Yeah, the sentencing will come, but maybe it'll come after you leave the presidency. So again, the point you made earlier about keeping a kind of sword of Damocles hanging over Trump. I mean, in the case of New York, the guy doesn't just have a case, he's got a conviction. So presumably the ball is in his court, and he can just, put down a sentence whenever he feels like it. And it looks like he might want to try to hold on to that power.
He might, but I think ultimately, if he plays it that way, he's going to have a problem with the appellate division of the First Department, which in oral argument, it seemed, I think, to everyone listening, that the defendant, the appellant, Donald Trump, had by far the better of it. The appellate department First Division is the intermediate appeal court that deals with New York County, which is the most prestigious county in what considers itself the most prestigious state judicial system in the country. It has a lot on its plate here in terms of recovering its reputation here. So hopefully they rule. They should have ruled by now. Frankly, I don't see any reason why there hasn't been a decision from the First Department. If it's anything like what oral argument suggested it should be, I'm looking forward to reading it.
That's very interesting. Now, Let's turn finally to this issue of, you mentioned the word retribution, and I know that there are some people, the attorney Mike Davis, for example, who has said, hey, listen, there are some federal statutes specifically which say that if government officials collude or conspire or work together to deny people their basic constitutional liberties, this is a crime and a serious crime. It's a felony. Now, as you probably know, Republicans are unaccustomed to deploying these statutes in the way the Democrats routinely use the accordion of federal statutes to go after our side. Do you think that mood has shifted and that there is a sense in the Trump team that, hey, listen, you know what? The real way to stop this is to subject these people to their own medicine a little bit, to recognize that two can play at this game. And we're not talking here about fabricating evidence. We're talking about using actual statutes on the books to hold these people accountable. Good idea?
It is a good idea, but we have to recognize that it's going to be an extremely difficult process because the Democrats don't have to swim upstream against every other institution in the country. The law schools, the corporate press, notwithstanding the we are the press, no, we are the press stuff. That's all very cute, but the brand equity, the network effects that these low-rated but highly compensated TV talking heads have to still be reckoned with. When the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times all come out and condemned this politicization, there's still going to be a certain amount of resonance. And we always have to act differently, not only because we insist on following the law, but also because we are the underdogs. They are the establishment. However, this is the time. Both houses of Congress, a majority Supreme Court, and the White House, if not now, never. It must be now. Everything is at stake, not only vindication, not only retribution, not only feeling good, not only, hashtag winning. Everything is at stake. Reforms need to be made in a balanced way that will benefit everyone. And that should be recognized, hopefully, by those people who still have their minds open, which is not a hell of a lot of people at this point. The world is pretty much divided, but it has to be done, Dinesh. No question about it.
I mean, Ron, to me, these are very wise words that coming from you, namely to recognize that there is an asymmetry of power, institutional power, and that we can expect that any attempt to do this will meet the full force of the legal establishment, the media establishment. There's going to be a lot of Hollywood wailing. But I think you are right, on the other hand, to say that in some ways the legal cases to me resemble the issue about the border. When I first heard people talking about mass deportations, I thought to myself, really in a very traditional Republican way, well, that's never really going to happen because the moment they start doing that, we're going to be subjected to images on CNN of wailing kids. Oh, please don't send me home. And this will immediately cause the Republicans to run for cover in their customary way. But I think what you're saying is there is a window of opportunity. You may not be able to get it all, but you better get started because the way to make progress, a lot of progress, is to start by making a little progress and then to build on that by going further. Guys, I've been talking to Ron Coleman, the attorney, a host of the Coleman Nation. Follow him on X at Ron Coleman. His website, coleman-nation.com. Ron, we got to have you back, but what a pleasure having you on, and thanks for joining me.
Great talking to you, Dinesh. Good to see you.
I'm drawing on the paperback edition of my new book, The Big Lie, and we're talking about the big lie about fascism and about Nazism. And as I mentioned, what the left has done since World War II is attempt a massive redefinition of fascism and even Nazism. And what I want to do today is to focus on the key ingredients of this false definition to show you why these defining elements about fascism and Nazism don't describe actual fascism or actual Nazism. So let's go through them one by one. The first one, fascism and Nazism are defined by racism and anti-Semitism. Now, this one I've already covered to some degree by pointing out that the fascists were not racist and they were not anti-Semitic. Neither one. Let's focus a little bit on Mussolini here. Mussolini was surrounded by Jews. There were a lot of Jews who came out of the Marxist and communist traditions, and Mussolini came out of that same tradition. So he had the early fascists in Italy there was an overrepresentation, as we say these days, of Jews. And if you look at Mussolini and his statements, there's nothing anti-Semitic about them. Now, he'll talk in generic terms about the superiority of the Italian race, and the term race was, at least at that time, often used to mean nationality. You'll even hear Churchill talk about our island race. He doesn't actually mean white. What he means is the British people. And so Mussolini uses some of that terminology, but it's very telling that later in the war, as Jews began to flee Germany, a number of them found refuge where? In Italy. In other words, Jews fled Nazi Germany and took refuge in fascist Italy, where Mussolini and Mussolini's people sheltered them, helped them get out of there, helped them escape. And so this is hardly the signature of an anti-Semite. I also mentioned that while Nazism indisputably has this racist component, and racist here I'm using in a generic sense to include anti-Semitism, Hitler was also racist against blacks and so on, but that really wasn't something he dealt with. He mainly dealt with Jews. This is where we have to make a distinction between fascism and Nazism. All right, let's keep going. A second characteristic attributed by the left to fascism is that fascism is somehow very reactionary. Fascism wants to go to the past, whereas, and that's what makes it right-wing. But in fact, the fascists never wanted to go to the past. The fascists saw themselves as products of the future. They embraced the Enlightenment idea that the future will always be better than the past. If you think about the framework of the Enlightenment, it was that things in the past were horrible. In the past, society was run by ignorant people and by priests, lying priests. And so the future will be run by the scientist and the philosopher. Now, here is the author Stanley Payne in his book, A History of Fascism. I'm quoting him. All of Hitler's political ideas, he writes, had their origin in the Enlightenment. In other words, the fascists were not reactionary. The last thing that the Enlightenment wanted to do is go back. It wanted to go forward in all respects. And if you look at the actual behavior of the fascists, they were very much into new stuff. In Italy, for example, they were into fast cars, new technology, new types of art. And here I'm quoting this is the Israeli historian Zev Sternhell, one of the great living authorities on fascism. Quote, far from being reactionary, the conceptual framework of fascism was nonconformist, avant-garde, and revolutionary in character. So I take this, remember the fascists, like the Nazis, were very much talked about a new society, a new man, creating a new future that would be different than the past. They might build on some of the mythology of the past, but their idea was to use the mythology as a guide to future greatness. I don't know if you've seen the film Cabaret, but in it, a young Hitler youth sings a admittedly beautiful ballad. But here is the theme of the ballad is, the main refrain of the song, tomorrow belongs to me. And again, you can see right here that the fascists are claiming not the past, not even the present, they're actually claiming the future. All right, let's go to another ingredient attributed to fascism and Nazism, which is authoritarianism. This is a big one, and of course we've heard a lot, Trump's an authoritarian. I don't really want to waste my time defending Trump against these kinds of accusations. I think you recognize that there's nothing authoritarian about Trump. He didn't do anything authoritarian. I really want to focus on whether or not authoritarianism is a defining feature of fascism and Nazism, because that's the underlying assumption. In other words, the logic goes, we all know that authoritarianism is a defining feature of fascism. Trump is an authoritarian, therefore Trump is a fascist. And the normal defense against that is, no, Trump is not an authoritarian, therefore he can't be a fascist. Really, what I'm arguing is that authoritarianism is in no way an important distinguishing feature of fascism or Nazism. Now, of course, I admit Hitler was an authoritarian. Mussolini was an authoritarian. But so were a ton of other people. Well, Lenin was an authoritarian. Stalin was an authoritarian. I wouldn't call Lenin and Stalin fascists. Here, there is some room for debate. Arguably, there was a fascist streak in Stalin that you don't find in Lenin. And this debate focuses on the fact that Lenin was an internationalist. So he was an international socialist. He always emphasized that the revolution has got to be global. It might start in Russia, but there's nothing unique about Russia per se. Whereas Stalin was really Mother Russia. And so if you think of Nazism or fascism as national socialism, in that sense, Stalin was more of a national socialist. Stalin cared about Russia. He didn't really care about what happened beyond Russian borders. In fact, even his murderous sprees were against fellow Russians. He wanted to arrest dissidents, relocate people, get rid of the farmers, send people to Siberia. Essentially, his venom was on his fellow citizens. Now, Franco was an authoritarian. Was he a fascist? No. Was he a Nazi? No. Now, again, some people are, well, of course Franco was a fascist. And the reason that you fall into this trap is you're applying the authoritarian, because he's an authoritarian, therefore he's a fascist. No. Franco was an old-style Roman Catholic. He wanted to restore the ancien regime, which is the way things used to be, which is an alliance of throne and altar. So, in other words, throne refers to monarchy. It refers to a single figure, an emperor or someone like Franco in charge, but allied with the church, and allied not allied with the old church. So a religious establishment wedded to a political establishment. But that's not fascism. Mussolini hated the church. Hitler hated the church. Pinochet in Chile was an authoritarian, not a fascist. Perón. Again, there's some debate around Perón, but again, I think a lot of it is Perón's got to be a fascist because, after all, he's an authoritarian. No. If you look at Perón's policies, yeah, they were left-wing. They were socialist. But they were... What I'm getting at here is there are people of all kinds of stripes, authoritarians from the beginning of time who have ruled their societies. Genghis Khan was an authoritarian, but he certainly wasn't a fascist. So we've got to throw aside this authoritarian nonsense. It is just not a... It is not an adequate definition of fascism. Fascism may include that, but so does monarchy, so does aristocracy, so do many other forms of government incorporate the idea of authoritarianism. I'll also talk about one more definition, and I'll do it very quickly, nationalism. Because, again, Trump is a nationalist, sure. Hitler was a nationalist, sure. Mussolini was a nationalist, sure. But so have been the heads of hundreds of other countries. In fact, it's really hard to find a country where the ruler is not some kind of a nationalist. In other words, doesn't believe in their own country. Go around the world right now. Most of the rulers around the world, whether they are democratically elected or not, are nationalist in some form. In fact, this is really why it's really weird that people act like it's strange for Trump to be America first. Have you ever met the leader of another country who isn't for that country first? I haven't. You don't think Zelensky is for Ukraine first? You don't think that Xi is China first? Modi is India first? And Giorgia Meloni is Italy first? So you can just do a survey and you realize all these people were nationalists. Churchill was a nationalist. De Gaulle was a nationalist. George Washington and Abraham Lincoln were nationalists. Mandela was a nationalist. Gandhi was a nationalist. And so I think you see where I'm going here. If nationalism and authoritarianism are the defining elements of fascism, you're going to mislabel not one or two, but hundreds of other people who satisfy these definitions and yet in no meaningful sense can be called fascists. And so this is all part, and I'll keep going when I pick this up, tomorrow, is that what the left is doing is they are picking up the incidental features of fascism and Nazism and deliberately confusing them with the true defining and distinguishing elements. And this is kind of what I mean by that. What I mean by that is that when you're defining something, you've got to look at what its core is. If I say, for example, America is defined by farming, this would be stupid. Of course, we have farmers in America, we have farmland, but there's nothing unique about farming that makes it American. Every other country has farmers. So farming is hardly the defining feature of America. If I was pointing to what makes America unique, it would hardly be farming. So that's what I'm getting at here. The left has constructed a false definition of fascism and Nazism. Why? Because they want to take us off the scent. They want us to look over here and not over there. Because if we looked over there, we would see right away that the true definition, the distinguishing features of fascism do not apply to us, but do apply to them.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.